Hey everybody, welcome back to another movie review. Hope you guys been enjoying the content channel as of late. Excuse me if my hair is a little messed up. Just was sitting on my bed watching this, and excuse me if my voice is a little bit light because it is a little bit late here at night. But I decided to check this out. Just was out of just wanting to watch something. So heard this was out, so decided to give it a look, even though I wasn't really all that interested in it. But in some ways, I am happy to have seen it because it actually makes for an interesting review. That film that we're going to be talking about briefly is The Rip, which was co-written and directed by Joe Carnahan, who mostly is known as I believe, an action-based filmmaker. I can't name any of his films offhand. I'll display one or two up here just so you guys know, what his line of work is kind of familiar in, or where his line of work lies. This stars Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, who also produced the film under their production company Artists Equality, as well as Stephen Young and Kyle Chandler, amongst other players here and there, Tiana Taylor and Sasha Call. And a story goes, this is a team that is working within the government. They are a civic force. They are above, regular police officers, but not above, that federal agents. They're somewhere in between, and they're not getting the respect that they deserve. And they go on a civic mission that involves them going into a house that has a ton of money, and their jurisdiction is within that of money. And they usually track down money, large sums of money, and then through that they will confiscate that money, have to count it out, doing all of what they have to do. But upon coming to see this money, which they find to be a lot more than they initially thought it was, there is some back and forth in terms of what they should do with the money, and ultimately some doubts as to the mission itself, and if everything seems the way it actually seems, or if there's more at play than what was led on at the start. So it's a basic premise, and going into it, I felt that that would probably be the case, a film essentially that of greed, about, the moral consequences to being greedy and acting selfishly. And for what the film is, for a good part of its time, it is, essentially that basic understanding. And for that, it is pretty generic. It doesn't have anything more writing on it. The way that the tension falls and drops is pretty vanilla. At some points, it feels like a cop out. So it's not like that there's anything quite riveting in terms of the tension to kind of over to shield us from that quite pretty bland, plotting. And the performances don't really do much either. I mean, you have an ensemble here that is mostly fairly hollow, and there is decent talent here. Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, respectively, I think do decent work. But, aside from Matt Damon, who I think just, as it stands, performance wise, I think that he is probably the strongest of the cast. Everybody else just does not feel like that they're doing their best. And I feel a large part of that stems from a lack of understanding of material, because as the film goes on, there comes a point when the film actually presents a twist. There's a big twist that happens in this. And what I mean by big, the better word for it would actually be retconning, because the biggest fault of the film, bar none, is the screenplay. Because what the film does is that it sets up a very, very basic premise about, about greed and about selfishness, and about these people in this house and how they are perceiving this money and what they can ultimately do with this money. And then the film decides to throw a curveball, and what does is completely undo everything that it sets up at the start, to where all of which does not feel warranted or understandable. And even at the start of which we had as a basic premise was still lacking in that understanding because of how basic everything was being developed. We didn't get a deeper understanding as to why people were doing the things that they did. And also, fundamentally, as characters, they're not necessarily good people. At the very start of the film, there is just this great sense of hostility that comes within all these characters, and you're just at least at the start, I was just rooting against them at the very beginning. And the movie, the story wants you to believe a certain thing. It's for that curve to be presented. But the problem with this twist is that it is quite nuclear in terms of how it acts to the story. It's not something that adds a certain layering to the story. It's ultimately a way to salvage what the basic premise that was being set up. It's almost as if Joe Carnahan, as he wrote this, um, it's almost as if him writing about two-thirds of the script, he realized how basic things were, so he felt maybe the writing in a twist and going down a rabbit hole in that way through this big just uh, spill of a dialogue that happens in this one confined space in the truck, that maybe it's salvageable in that end, but it just makes it so much more messier than it ever needed to be. And it just could have just been something very basic, but he decides to go for something else, and it just is absolutely just absolutely just nonsensical, absolutely just of a Hail Mary attempt to just salvage what is a really poorly written screenplay. And I feel as though the performances are kind of an extension to that because everybody just feels like that they're just trying to figure it out themselves, but not necessarily in that, oh, well, we're acting mysterious, or that, oh, there's a richness to the screenplay and there's very careful things you have to do here and there. It's just a mess, really. And I didn't feel that way at the start. Initially I just felt, well, okay, this is very, very basic, but it's as if they knew that the screenwriter, as if he knew that himself, and he tried to basically overwrite, his whole project, and what you get is just something much more messy than it needed to be. So yeah, I think it's a bit of a mess, and I think that the performances unfortunately suffer as a result because it just feels as though everybody's just kind of walking around aimlessly, and a lot of these other performances, just as they stand, like Sasha Call especially, just don't have much life to them and just feel very just out of place and not creating the tension that's trying to breed. And when that twist does happen, it makes you also question why it is that we set up all these things in a very specific way anyway, to essentially create an escape code for your screenplay. Like, if anything, the movie should have been called that, escape code, because that's essentially what the screenplay is doing, is trying to find itself an escape code. And it finds one, but it's just not warranted in any sense of the word. So yeah, I think that it is a mess, and I think that it could have been just basic if they had just stuck with what they had. But they decided to go to shoot bigger, and they came up way more shorter than they needed to be, or what they could have been. So yeah, so those are my thoughts on the rip. I thought it was poorly written, and I feel, and unfortunately, it acted as quite a nuclear device to its narrative, and created more of a just a doubtful, more of a generic. Uh, the craftsmanship as it stands is just highly generic as it stands. With the action just being just that shaky cam nonsense, and just the like the unpolished nature to it all. Like the CG is not great either, but generally just by the writing, it just was going in a place that just felt highly unnecessary, and it's just screaming of desperation to create higher meaning to what is this a very basic idea of greed and selfishness. So those are my thoughts on the rip. You guys, let me know your thoughts on the rip if you guys checked it out. It's on Netflix, and yeah, not good, not good. So let me know if you guys feel differently. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And that's gonna be it for this video, guys. Thank you guys for tuning in. And until then, I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye.